Happy Friday and welcome into my home away from home, the Millvale Studios. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge, found at riversedgepgh.com, a new kind of radio, and this is a new kind of sports talk. Gike's Got Game, episode 62, my second one since becoming a father and since my brain has become short-circuited and otherwise preoccupied. I can promise a little more coherence this week. It's amazing what a week of routine will do with a little one at home. I can also promise a lot more hockey. This will be a back-to-hockey episode, if you will, and I surely will, with the emphasis on the Penguins, but also the NHL and hockey in this country at large. I'm excited to welcome a guest I've never had on this program before, but one I've had on previous shows. Chris Peters, formerly of CBSSports.com and the United States of Hockey.com, and in fact, the U.S. National Team Development Program, too. So we'll be talking pucks with him, and in particular, a piece that I love that he wrote as his last piece for CBS Hockey, in fact, about Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby and the two phenoms entering the league a decade apart, and a much healthier NHL that McDavid inherited than Crosby and Ovechkin did 10 years ago. But that's just a small part of what we have coming up over the course of this hour of power on the River's Edge. And again, thank you to Tom Benoit for engineering. He drew the short straw, so he's here with me this week instead of Brian Crawford. And I thank Tom for his time. I thank you for listening or watching. Of course, we have two options, both equally viable at riversedgepgh.com. Just visit my podcast page. Again, the show is Gike's Got Game, and I am Matt Gajka. I am a reporter / analyst / multimedia host. I wear many hats over at DKPittsburghSports.com, and that's what I love about that gig, is the ability to do a whole bunch of things. And of course, this, my primary broadcast outlet, happy to be with River's Edge for, it's going to be 17, 18 months now, and it has been quite the ride, quite the experience. If you would like to offer feedback on the show, you can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter at Matt Gajka, MattGajTka. I'm also on Facebook, same name, except with sports media. Put at the end of it, I have one of those pages you can like, and I post quite a bit of work there, including this show each and every week. And you can find the River's Edge on both of those outlets as well, and it's River's Edge PGH on Twitter, by the way, so it matches our URL. And what I want to get into at the start of today's program, this opening statement, will be honing in on the defending Stanley Cup champions. Of course, those are your Pittsburgh Penguins, and their progress report, as they are now 16 games into an 82-game season. And as I was discussing with Penguins historian Bob Grove this week, there's a nice name drop, and he's been on this show in the past too. We were talking about, standings-wise, record-wise, this has been a very good start for the Penguins compared to past champions, especially in the salary cap era, or even going back to the turn of the century. The Penguins, even after that ugly stomping that the Capitals administered to them Wednesday night, are still 10-4-2. And that's the best start for a defending champ, since they themselves were 12-4 at this point in 2009-10. And you might recall that year, the Penguins won 9 of their first 10 and slowed down after that. They never really captured that type of positive momentum into the second half of the season. Of course, they made it through the first round of the playoffs, and they had a fairly strong regular season finish, but then they fell victim to the Montreal Canadiens in the second round, losing in 7 games. And my colleague Josh Yohe at DK Pittsburgh Sports often talks about how he's had chats with Sidney Crosby and how Sid thought that they were simply out of gas in that playoff run. And I often thought if they got past Montreal, which had knocked out the top seed Washington, they probably would have gone back-to-back, but they would have had to get through the juggernaut Blackhawks that year, who, judging by at least puck possession numbers, they were the top team in hockey, and it wasn't even close in 09-10. But I digress a bit. The Penguins so far this year are not quite at the level they were at 7 years ago when they were trying to defend their first Stanley Cup of this era, but they're pretty close. Points in 12 of 16, wins in 10 of 16. But As I wrote on the website this week for my weekly Matt Stats feature, the Penguins are decidedly middle of the road in one area, and that's where they're going to get a C from me. And overall in this progress report, I'll give them a B because the results have been there. And in fact, if you look at scoring chances for and against, the Penguins are right at the top of the NHL, are fairly close. But they are middle of the road in shot attempts, controlling the shot battle. And as much as we may like to think that teams can dictate scoring chances more than they can just the raw shot numbers, both for and against, that's not what has been borne out in the research. And research has indicated, since shot attempts have been able to be tracked, which dates back 11 seasons now, that shots for and against more predict goals for and against than any other publicly available metric. And I say that because there's probably something out there that some team or teams is sitting on at the moment. Maybe even the Penguins are sitting on something interesting that allows them to believe what they're doing right now is more sustainable than what the Corsi or the Fenwick, which are the shot attempt metric names, and we can quibble about, I hate the names, but that's what they're called for right now, so we'll go with that. But the Penguins, who have a local Carnegie Mellon stats expert, Sam Ventura, heading up their analytics department, they may think that what they're doing, which as I mentioned is creating scoring chances, and a lot of them high-danger scoring chances, is sustainable over 6 months. And then, of course, they hope 2 more months as they try to defend their title. But really, when you look back at the last 10 years, it's really tough to sustain a good scoring chance differential if you don't have a good shot differential. And I looked at this, as I mentioned, for my feature. 8 of the top 10, in fact, the top 8 teams in scoring chance differential last year in the NHL were also in the top 10 in shot differential. There were a couple of outliers in there, but there always are. However, year after year, if you look at it, if you have more shots, you have more chances. It's really tough to get the quality, in other words, if you don't have the quantity. And so I'm not at all afraid to say that even though the results have been mostly there for the Penguins, I mentioned the loss to the Capitals on Wednesday, there were also 2 no-shows on the road earlier this season at Montreal, at Nashville, blowout losses. They haven't looked terrific consistently, but the results, I would say, have been mostly there. They're right near the top of the Metropolitan Division. However, the process has been lacking, and that goes back to the relentless approach that carried them to the Stanley Cup, rolling 4 lines, especially the top 3, with HBK getting advantageous matchups as teams tried to put their better defenders on Crosby with his line and Malkin with his line. First of all, Crosby was out for the first several games of the season. Evgeny Malkin hasn't really gotten started. Chris Letang has been in and out of the lineup too, and now we just learned yesterday, in fact, that Patrick Hornqvist and Chris Kunitz, 2 of the Penguins' top 6 forwards, could be out for some time. Hornqvist with a concussion, suffered at Washington, and Kunitz with a lower body injury, also suffered in that same game, that blowout loss that I've mentioned a couple of times. So even though the Penguins are right there, near the top of the Eastern Conference, near the top of the Metropolitan Division, I can't say I'm terribly bullish, if they continue to play like this, about their chances to be at the top of the Metro as the calendar page turns over to 2017 and things get a little more serious. And in fact, what's interesting about the NHL schedule this year, one of the things, is that every team gets a bye week, so to speak. This is more like football now, and the Players Association fought for this to get an extended stretch of time off, and the Penguins have theirs right at the new year. So the first week of January, there will be no games. That'll be a reset. They still have about 6 weeks to go before they get there, and if I had to set an intermediate goal for them in the interim, if I'm Mike Sullivan, and I am clearly not, but if I am Mike Sullivan and I have the ear of the room, I'm saying that we need to tilt the ice a little bit better, be more on our details. And something that I've noticed from watching most of the games so far this year, I've missed 1 or 2, catching up on NHL.tv, but I'm charting every Penguins game this year for a blue line project, so to speak. I'm looking at the Penguins' success rate getting out of their own zone and getting into the opponent's zone. And several of these games that I have charted so far, I've gotten through the entire month of October, have about half the games done in November, working my way through it. You notice that the lack of detail stands out at times. And the blue lines, you could argue, are the most important parts on the ice. And we can say that, well, right in front of the net on both sides of the ice is more important because that's where the scoring chances come from. But you can't get there if you're not getting out of your zone with control and you're not getting into the zone with control. Research has shown that if you have control of the puck, getting into the offensive zone, you are much more likely to get a shot, much more likely to get a scoring chance than if you were forced to dump it in. And we've seen a lot more dump-ins, I think, from the Penguins, a lot more clears from their own end, too. So lack of control through the neutral zone and forward and further up the ice than what we saw late last year. Could it be a question of focus? Seems like Mike Sullivan was at least leaning that way on Wednesday night when he said his team wasn't ready to play, and I'll have more on that in the second period of tonight's show as part of Ban the Cliche, so we'll have a little fun with that expression. But I think it rang true, and I mentioned those two games at Montreal, at Nashville. Also, as I've gone through this season, as I've charted these games, the Penguins, and you don't even have to look at it with that much detail to realize, but the Penguins have had their struggles getting started this year. And several times this season, they've fallen behind by 1 and 2 early, but they've been able to surge back and push back with strong second and third periods, especially the third period, and steal whether it be 2 points or 1 point in the standings. It's not a formula for success. The team knows this, the players know this, but I can't help but think that when you get away with it a couple of times, that can perhaps take away the urgency to improve. So that's the challenge for Mike Sullivan and his coaching staff, and really the team leadership. Sidney Crosby heading up that group as they move into the latter part of November and on into December, wrapping up the first half of the schedule, motivating themselves to improve, to work on that process, even though they have been able to grind out results more often than not. And that's a tough thing. Oftentimes we need the pain of a loss to motivate us to change. That's just human nature, and that's the struggle of maintaining a level. If you are a coaching staff, if you are an athletic team, if you are a corporation, a work group, a project group that you have at work, it's all the same. If you don't have that sting of failure, and this is something that Clint Hurdle talks about often too on the Pirates side here in town, but if you don't have that sting of failure, then a lot of things can get brushed under the rug rather easily, and you have to have that discipline to be on your details, to be on your P's and Q's, to dot your I's and cross your T's. And I haven't seen that consistently enough from the Penguins befitting a Stanley Cup champion. There have been moments, and I've mentioned these comebacks, in which they have found it in the middle of a game. But there have been very few games this year, maybe the game against Toronto last Saturday, when maybe they felt like they were challenged by this young and up-and-coming Leafs team, or they felt like they were on national television across Canada on CBC's Hockey Night. Who knows what the reason was. Maybe it was just one of those nights when most guys were on the same page. But that type of a night, that type of a game for the Pens has been rather rare this year. We're only through 16 games. The Penguins play the Islanders in Brooklyn on the road here on Friday night. And then they have a really intriguing home-and-home against the Rangers next week. Home at Consol, or I keep doing that, not Consol, PPG Paints Arena on Monday, and then at Madison Square Garden on Wednesday. And it's funny, you look at the Rangers, the one team ahead of the Penguins in the standings. The Capitals are tied with the Pens for second in the Metro. But the Rangers have, in fact, done what the Penguins have been doing. But I feel like with the Rangers, that's more of part of the plan. Play a little rope-a-dope, let Henrik Lundqvist bail you out a few times, absorb some pressure, and then shoot the puck out onto the wings and let a lot of the speed that they have, your Chris Kreiders, your Rick Nashes, your Mika Zibanejad that they picked up in the offseason, Jimmy Vesey they signed from Harvard, the youngster from Russia, Pavel Buchnevich, Matt Zuccarello. All these guys can fly. They have skill. So the Rangers, I think, are playing kind of a counterattack game. They are 26th in the league. As I check my notes here, they dropped down a spot even last night. But the Rangers are 26th in the NHL in shot differential. I mentioned the Penguins are middle of the road. They're 16th. The Rangers are even worse. They're at 26th. It's really tough to have even a winning record when you're in the bottom third of those puck possession metrics. But they have generated scoring chances at a high rate. And in fact, they're right there with the Penguins in scoring chance share. They have been around 2 or 3 all season long. And at least according to one site, naturalstattrick.com, in high danger chances, they have created the most in the NHL. Yes, they have allowed quite a bit against, so they don't have the same percentage success that the Penguins have. in terms of for and against, but they've been very dangerous in playing this type of game, and they have scored the most goals in the NHL by far this season. It's not even close. They're averaging over 4, and their goal differential this year for the Rangers, as they're off to this 13-4 start, is near plus 30, I believe, last I checked, and that, again, at this early stage of the game, is right at the top of the 30-team league. So Rangers and Penguins could be very interesting to see which team can find success over the course of 120 minutes, and maybe more if they play overtime next week. Which approach could work out, which approach will play out in the end. I still like the Penguins a little bit better with guys like Kessel, Crosby, and Malkin, all of whom I believe are better natural talents, even though it might be close over a guy like Rick Nash, but I mentioned Kreider and some of the youngsters they've added. I still like the Penguins' high-end talent, but perhaps the Rangers have a little bit more in terms of skill and finishing. In fact, I'm pretty sure they do, even with a couple of guys like Hornqvist and Kunitz, even if they're in the lineup next week. They're not the best finishers in the world. They're good puck possessors. They're guys with good hockey sense, but they're not going to put the puck in the net for you that often. They need more chances to score, whereas the Rangers, and I think we're seeing that early on, don't need as many chances to score, and so we're seeing more goals from them so far. And in fact, if I had to pick a team that could succeed this way, not a ton of shots, but the shots they do get are golden opportunities, I think I might pick the Rangers because of their ability to finish the play. Nothing against the Penguins, but I think they have to be more of a quantity team in order to get those goals. Outside of Crosby, outside of Malkin and Kessel, there aren't many elite finishers on the Pens, at least as presently constructed. And the way the Penguins have played has me leaning against or leaning away from talking too much about the two goalies. And Marc-Andre Fleury had been doing quite well until Wednesday's impromptu relief appearance at Washington. Matt Murray knocked out of the game, literally. A little friendly fire there with Yevgeny Malkin's stick catching him in the face after his mask had been knocked off during a goalmouth scrum. So, tough break for Murray. Had to go into the concussion protocol. He wasn't too pleased. It didn't seem like, judging from Josh Yohe's article from Washington, that he had to sit out the end of the first period, and then Mike Sullivan, playing it safe, went with Fleury, and Marc-Andre did not look, again, there's that ready-to-play thing. He did not look sharp. And Marc-Andre's had a couple in a row now where he appears to be entering a bit of a fallow period in terms of his form, whereas Matt Murray, even though I still think his technique isn't as polished as Marc-Andre's, Matt Murray's gotten the results, and as we saw against Toronto last weekend, he has made the big saves. Not that that's something you want to continually do or rely on your goalie to do, but now those results are in the past. He played really well, did Murray, out west, Anaheim, Anaheim and San Jose, and then the game against Toronto, incomplete grade against Washington. But at this stage, with Murray healthy, back from that injury he suffered at the World Cup, he's playing more and more. It looks like he's probably going to end up with more starts by the end of December. We'll see how things play out, and assuming that Murray bounces back from that nick he got on Wednesday. But I thought I might be talking about the goalies this week, but I'll pass on that. The team play is the one thing that concerns me so far for the Pens that isn't quite up to snuff. So progress report for the Stanley Cup champions, of course, at this early stage, but I will give them a B. Good results, but process needs to be boosted at least a little bit for me to feel more confident about their chances to finish at the top of the Metro and get a good seeding as they head into the playoffs next spring. We'll take a step back and bring it on back for the second period of Geik Scott Game after this. I'm Matt Geika. You're listening and watching The River's Edge at riversedgepgh.com.
Thanks so much for hanging out the River's Edge Radio. Right here, you got Jeremy Kaywood hanging with Brian Crawford for this little promo. December 2nd at the Funhouse of Mr. Smalls is my CD release show. You should come and check that out, December 2nd at the Funhouse of Mr. Smalls. We have Andre Costello, Jeremy Colbert, Tori Shinneman for some spoken words, some classical violin playings and stylings from Johanna Chastik. Special appearances by Adam Levine and The Way of Life. It's going to be so awesome. You should come on down to the Funhouse at Mr. Smalls on December 2nd for my CD release show. Thanks, guys. Keep listening to River's Edge Radio.
I am a dog,
And I must obey to be fed and throw the ball. And I will chase it till the end. I keep running and panting.
Welcome back to Gike's Got Game. I'm your host, Matt Geica, here on the River's Edge. And you'll notice I'm wearing a lot of green today. I'll explain the Marshall apparel. That's my alma mater, which I think I've mentioned on this program before. Very proud graduate of Marshall University, class of 2007. My final number has to do with the Thundering Herd and an important date that just passed for not just Marshall fans and Marshall alums, but fans of sports and especially college football. It was, again, an emotional moment down in Huntington, West Virginia this past week, but more on that later in today's episode. I promised a lot of hockey. Hope I delivered on that in the first segment. I'll continue to do so as we move along. Later in the program, my expert witness will be Chris Peters, currently a free agent writer, and that's a shame because I think he was doing fantastic work covering the NHL and USA Hockey for CBSSports.com. He used to have his own website, United States of Hockey. We'll get with Chris, who comes to us from the middle of Iowa. I believe he's living near Cedar Rapids these days. And Iowa, in fact, is where Chris and I first met several years ago, both chasing the dream of careers in sports. So it'll be good to reconnect with him in just a little bit. But before we get to that, shorter segment here for period number 2 on Gike's Got Game. I'm bumping Ban the Cliche up in the rotation because I just talked about it in the first segment. Mike Sullivan said it a couple of times after the game. I believe this statement was parroted by several of his players afterward. I said yesterday, I meant Wednesday at Washington. The Penguins' 7-1 loss to the Caps. Their worst to the Capitals since the early 90s, in fact, 1991 to be exact. It has been a while since they lost by 6 or more to the Caps, but Sullivan saying this statement, "We weren't ready to play," which seems to be more of a thing in hockey than any other sport. And you don't often hear that in, say, football, maybe because you only have one chance a week to play, so you better be ready to play in that situation. You don't hear it in baseball that much, too, either. And I don't know why. I guess if there is one sport where you could have an excuse for not being ready to play, it would be baseball, with the grueling nature of that schedule. Nearly every day is a game day, 6 or 7 games a week for the most part over the course of 6 months. But I don't know why it's such a struggle in hockey to be ready to play and to hear that we weren't ready to play so often. And that's what you hear when teams don't get off to a good start. It could mean physically, I suppose, ready to move your legs, but I think it's more of a mental thing that coaches and players complain about. But I think it's an overly easy and simplified answer to give to reporters after the game, when in reality, the things that ailed you were much more complicated than being ready. All these players have their routines, especially once you get into the professional ranks, and especially in the NHL too. You know how to get ready to play. If you didn't know how to do that, you would not be in the NHL. And I realize sometimes things get tedious. We've definitely gotten past the point of the schedule where the novelty of playing hockey again exists. We've gotten, as I mentioned, 16 games in to the regular season. So now it's about professionalism. And if I had one universal bit of praise to get to Dan Bilesma when he was the Penguins coach, his teams really did well coming out of the gate in the first period. And I'm not sure if I should give too much credit for that, because at times they would fade afterward, but I always thought it spoke well of Bilesma's professionalism and his players' professionalism, really, because they're the ones going out there, that they were such strong starters. I remember so many times the Penguins scoring early with Dan Bilesma at the controls. I think so many times the Penguins, and the way they played under Disco Dan, was kind of an ambush. It was quick, and it was fast. It was zone to zone before that was in vogue, and now it seems like half the NHL is doing that, and maybe 2/3 to the entire league is trying to at least speed up its level of play, its style of play. But back in the early part of this decade especially, the Penguins would jump on teams quickly, and it's such an advantage because the game changes when you're on top, in the sport of hockey especially. Stylistically, you can be more relaxed. You don't have to force things. You don't have to hang your goaltender out to dry if you don't absolutely feel the need to press numbers forward. So it's important, And that's why I wonder really how you can be not ready to play if you do understand all of that. And I think every player in the NHL does. I think every coach does. And maybe, just spitballing here, maybe hockey requires more energy to play properly than other sports. I think you need a certain degree of passion to play hockey. It's not exactly a sport you can coast into. It's not like baseball in that it's more cerebral. It's not like soccer where you're going to be running around for 90 minutes, so you better conserve some energy at the start. Hockey's played in 30 to 1 minute bursts, and usually shorter than 1 minute if you're playing it right. And there are some exceptions depending on certain guys like Chris Letang who are very cardiovascularly gifted. But hockey's played best 100% effort for short bursts, and maybe that takes a little bit more to get up for. And maybe that's why you see guys use the smelling salts on the bench to just reach that optimal arousal state, as I talked about on this show a couple of months back with local strength and conditioning coach Jeremy Hoy, who coaches a lot of or trains a lot of the Pittsburgh-born pro hockey players out there. He talks about having that optimal level of arousal, not being overly stimulated, not being overly nervous or jittery, but also not being sluggish. And so I guess that's maybe what teams, coaches, and players are getting at when they say they're not ready to play. But it doesn't reflect well on you when you say that. And so not only is it overly simplistic, I think also it may not be wise to use that excuse too often because, particularly for a coach, your job is to have your players ready to play. And when I hear that over and over again, I start to wonder if it's just something that's being said as lip service, and it's a case of a coach or a player is not wanting to reveal too much about a tactical thing that went wrong, about maybe a player or two who were particularly off their games on that given night. I'm all for taking responsibility, but I just wish they could find a different way to say it. So we weren't ready to play gets put on the ban the cliche list here on Geiks Got Game. When we return from this break, it's time for my expert witness to join the show for period number 3, talking more hockey, more pucks with Chris Peters, formerly of CBSSports.com. Talk to you on the other side of this break.
Ugh, the holidays. I'm so sick of downtown and all of the traffic and the hustle and bustle. Can't find a parking space. It's awful.
Well, did you hear about the Millville Small Town Holiday Celebration?
Oh, I did. You mean the second annual Yuletide tour?
Yes, skip the mall, shop small.
I'd love to shop and explore the 25 stops on this year's tour.
Wow, I love Millville businesses. This is awesome. 25 shops, that's great. But what am I going to do with the kids? The kids are going to get bored of shopping all day.
I hear they're having a Christmas carnival at the Millville Community Center from 1 to 3 with Santa.
And Santa is coming to town at 6 o'clock to light the tree.
So what do I do in between with the kids?
Well, there will be horse-drawn sleigh rides for the family from 1:30 to 3 with live music and entertainment throughout the day.
Oh, that's great. The kids will be worn out.
We'll drop the kids off with the sitter and come relax and enjoy Millville's pub scene. We'll have drink specials and live music.
So come on out Saturday, December 3rd, 10 to 10, and explore all of the great businesses Millville has to offer. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter for more information at BAM15209.
Shop local.
Welcome back to Geiks Got Game on the River's Edge, a new kind of radio, and hopefully I'd like to provide a new kind of sports talk here. Each and every Friday, 8 a.m. first run, then you can catch, of course, the recording on the podcast page at riversedgepgh.com, and we have the videos up on YouTube as well. If you're interested in checking out my collegiate garb, I mentioned sporting the Marshall green, the Kelly green of the Thundering Herd this week. My guest at this time is more of a fan of red, and I believe it's gold of Iowa State. His name is Chris Peters. He's out there in the Hawkeye State. And Chris, thank you so much for joining me. I know that certainly it's college football time out there, but when it comes down to talking to you, I know you're always ready to talk hockey.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Matt. I mean, and it's Cardinal and gold.
Cardinal
so
and gold. Okay.
Let's not mess around here with this red stuff. It's Cardinal.
Wow.
But yeah. I am I am more than happy to talk hockey, college football, really anything at this point. So it's a good time.
Outstanding. Well, as I mentioned in the previous segment, Chris is formerly of CBSSports.com, also UnitedStatesOfHockey.com, and he previously worked with the United States National Team Development Program in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it was in that last role that I mentioned that Chris and I first crossed paths. It was in the state of Iowa, Chris. It was in Sioux City for the Fall Classic,
That's
2009.
Right.
Didn't we shared a broadcast, I believe.
I think so.
I was working for the Youngstown Phantoms. That was my first full-time gig out of college, and you were the PR maven for the NTDP. So I think a lot of things have changed since then, but we both still share a passion for the sport. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, I saw on your Twitter feed, was that getting your little guy on the ice for the first time, Learn to Play Day in Cedar Rapids?
Yeah. I got him out. On Saturday, USA Hockey had their national Try Hockey Free Day, which they've been doing for about 7 years, and it's a pretty incredible event. And my son has skated before, but he'd never been on the ice with sticks and pucks, and they had all sorts of stations set up there at the Cedar Rapids Ice Arena. So it was really neat. He didn't last very long. He's only 4, so it's ages 4 to 9, and he was one of the littler guys out there. But he enjoyed himself for the short time that he was there, and he's got some good hands, man. I mean,
Nice.
I was surprised. He knows his way around the rink there, so that's a good sign.
He's learned from his dad, I'm sure, in that regard. What do they have 4-year-olds doing when they first get him on the ice? What's the procedure like out there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that they have to do is just make sure they can stand up. And luckily for my little guy, he had his own. He had some skating lessons, so he knew how to stand up and not fall down. And it is pretty funny to watch. The coaches are just trying to keep kids on their skates, and it's amazing how fast some kids pick it up. And when you're trying to get kids to learn to play hockey, the skating is obviously the hardest part. And it's kind of the barrier to entry. It takes some time and a lot of patience. And but I'm always inspired by the resolve of young kids, because they'll fall down, they'll take real hard falls, but they'll get right back up. And I saw some real bad ones on Saturday, but they were always, nobody left crying. That's for sure.
We'll chat more about USA Hockey in a little bit. I want to talk about youth and young hockey players, not exactly maybe 4 years old or 7 years old, but your last piece for CBSSports.com, I really enjoyed it. It was prior to Connor McDavid's first visit to Pittsburgh to square off against Sidney Crosby, and about a decade apart, these two phenoms have entered the NHL, and you wrote that Connor McDavid inherits a league much more healthy and a much better position than Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin did. Of course, they both came in after the full season lockout. 2005-06 was their respective first seasons in the league. But your argument, your column, if you will, was about the progress the NHL has made in that decade plus. If you could, flesh out your argument for the listeners and let them know why you feel that way.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that going back to that 2005-06 season, that the NHL was at a real low point in terms of fan interest, casual interest. This was the end. They weren't on ESPN anymore. They were on the Outdoor Life Network. That was where you would find your games. And that there was a real poor Olympics in 06, and the league was just kind of devoid of honest to goodness stars, and in come Alex Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby. And from day one, really, they became the phenoms and the faces of the league. And then they really have been for the last 10 years. But, at that point, we were calling Sidney Crosby the next one, in reference to the next Gretzky or, similar player. I mean, there obviously were, big stars between Gretzky and Crosby. But at that point, the league was really struggling. And even though Mario Lemieux is still there, it wasn't him at his prime. And obviously the Penguins were struggling as a franchise at that point. And so, yeah, I mean, it to see where the league has come since then, the fact that they're essentially, the TV is in much better situation. I think there probably there's room for improvement there still, but The league as a whole is just far better, far healthier, making more money. They have the ability to add a 31st franchise in Las Vegas. And I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that without Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin arriving at the time, it would have taken the league much longer to get to this point. And now they've been the faces of the NHL for the last 11 years, essentially. And now they can they don't have to carry the league themselves anymore. And I think that Connor McDavid is that player that could very well be the guy that kind of carries the torch. And so it's not about, when Crosby and Ovechkin came in, the league was at such a low point. Now the league's at a higher point, but it has room to grow. And so that's kind of up to McDavid to take this better league. And we're seeing, look at all the young guys in the league that are making immediate impact and making names for themselves. They are coming in at a time where the league has that opportunity to really skyrocket, and they will be the ones that take it to that next level. Because as Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin get older and their skills diminish and they're not, among the league leaders anymore, which, who knows how long it'll take for that to happen. But the next group has arrived, and that is very important for the NHL.
Hockey writer Chris Peters is my guest in the third period of Geics Got Game this week. Chris, what is it about this group of young players that has you most intrigued? McDavid seems to be the one that has the most skill, has the most ability out of the group, but you have a guy like Patrick Laine taking Winnipeg by storm, taking the league by storm with his goal-scoring ability, coming right into it and really showing that he might be the best of that draft class. And all the guys we saw, I suppose, from that under-23 team at the World Cup, maybe that helps consolidate them in all of our minds, but from Johnny Gaudreau on down the list, what is it about this group that makes you excited about its potential?
Well, I think they're coming into a much more skilled NHL overall, and the fact that they're coming in and having an immediate impact with, Laine with 12 goals already as a rookie and, the leading scorer in the league, leading goal scorer in the league. Austin Matthews coming in and having a 4-goal debut, and he might be in a slump right now, but I don't anticipate that'll last very long. And Jack Eichel, who's, injured right now, another guy that has that opportunity. And these are guys that are clearly already at their young age leading NHL franchises and already taking that step of being the guy. And so when you have exciting players like that, most of those guys, they're only going to get better. It's, we're not even seeing them at the peak of their talent yet. So that's why there's just so many of them. And you mentioned the under 23 team, and I thought that was a very symbolic of the direction the NHL was heading, and saying, the league is continually getting younger, and as a result, it's getting better. I mean, I think this season, from a pure entertainment standpoint, is far better already than last season was as a whole. And there was plenty of things to get excited about last season, but the things that these young guys are doing, the fact that we still have Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin, and unfortunately, we've had some injuries. Other guys like Stamkos have gone down, but we still have those guys, and the Jamie Benns and everybody else that have been dominant players in the NHL. And so you add this new mix of talent, and again, I just think they're the guys that are ready to take it a step further. And also, I think it is important for the Canadian teams to be good again. It's not as important for the U.S., but it's important for the overall health of the game. And I think that with so many of them being on Canadian teams, there's going to be a real renaissance for Canadian hockey, or Canadian NHL hockey, I should say. So I think that's only a good thing as well.
It's been so long since the Leafs were good. It was just fun the other night, Chris. They were in Pittsburgh, and they were flying up and down the ice. I know they were giving up a ton of chances, but they at least looked frisky. That was the first time I remember thinking that the Leafs could actually be decent since who knows when, maybe even before the previous lockout. They have been trying to find some sort of a foothold, and maybe they do now with that young group they have up there. I'm curious about your thoughts on the remarks that Deputy Commissioner Bill Daley made in Toronto earlier this week, raised the ire of some hockey fans. Essentially what he said was that the league marketing Crosby versus Ovechkin might have been a mistake 10 years ago, and they feel that hockey is, quote, the ultimate team sport, and perhaps they should not market individuals into the future, and it seems like they don't want to market individual talents in the sport because of the way that hockey is played and the way that even the best players only play a third of the game right around or whereabouts. Did you feel like that was a bit of a tone-deaf comment like most people did, or did you at least understand where Daly was coming from there?
Well, I see some of it, but I mean, I disagree that it was a mistake to market the individuals, because I think that those were the two guys that were getting the endorsement deals, that were getting the opportunities, that were putting the league on, the off chance that hockey would be on SportsCenter. Those would be the guys that they would have on there. And I still think that they have as much to do as anybody else with the growth of the NHL over the last decade. And so to say that we shouldn't market individuals is in my opinion, ridiculous and actually kind of dumb, with all due respect to Bill Daly. I think
I'm with you.
But on the other hand, I can understand where he's coming from, because as we look at TV ratings, and I can tell you, the Chicago Blackhawks became the most marketable team. It used to be the Pittsburgh Penguins. After they won in 2009, there was no team hotter than the Penguins. Then the Blackhawks come along, and it wasn't as big after 10. I think really after 2013, when they won that second Stanley Cup, all of a sudden the Blackhawks mania really kicked into high gear, and they became this juggernaut. And so you need big market teams to be good. You just do. And unfortunately for the NHL, Columbus getting great doesn't help them very much. They need teams that like the Chicagos, like the New York Rangers, like the Philadelphia Flyers and the Penguins. They need those teams to be very good. The problem is you can't anticipate that. What you can anticipate is how good the players are going to be, the individual players. Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, Patrick Laine, and these are all guys in Canadian franchises, so it doesn't help them as much in the U.S., but those are the types of players that, I think that they can market. Goudreau as well. There's so many good players for them to market. So you have to do both. And I think, you look right now, and we don't get McDavid on national TV very often down here. And we don't get after the Winter Classic, or the Heritage Classic, or I guess Centennial Classic, whichever out there,
whatever it is.
yeah.
There's so many.
We get Matthews. That's it. So we need to. I think the league as a whole, and also the media and everybody else, we're all in this together. It's important for all of us to try to grow the game, and I think that you can do it through individuals, and absolutely teams drive television ratings, but I still think that players are the ones that drive fan interest the most, in terms of, the most viral moment of this entire season was Austin Matthews' 4-goal game. There has not been a moment that has come close to topping that. And so you need those individual feats, those things that I've never seen that before. And McDavid is the kind of guy where I've never seen anything like him before. Mm-hmm. That makes me want to watch. Now, I'm a hockey fan. How does a casual fan get involved in that? That's what the league has to decide. And I think that they still need to have a balance between promoting the players and promoting the teams, because both are important. And I still think that was one that Bill Daly probably should take back.
I think he probably wishes he could at this point, judging by how that comment was picked up everywhere, and most reviews were like ours, unfavorable of that. Chris, you touched upon it with your comment about mixing the individual and the team in terms of marketing the league, but if you were in charge of marketing the NHL and you had this bevy of young talent, you have still teams like the Blackhawks, as you mentioned, and the Pittsburgh Penguins, some of your glamour franchises in the U.S. and proven draws. How would you go about marketing it? How would you try to get the NHL in front of eyeballs that typically don't watch hockey games, at least historically speaking?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with the media rights deal, and that's something that the league really doesn't have much control over for another few years. So, I think that it's very important for them to maintain a flagship television partner. However, the league in the early 90s was on ESPN. It was on Fox Sports. It was on, you could find it nationally at a variety of places. And I think that being on ESPN again is going to be important. Even though there's cord cutting and whatever else, it's only more important to be on the station that most people have, the network that most people have. So I think that that's part of it. Is it's going to come with the TV rights deal. I think the outdoor games are starting to kind of run their course. They're not nationally popular as they once were. I still think they should do them, because if you've ever been to one, it is amazing for that hockey community. It still draws excitement. It still sells tickets. There's no reason to stop unless it becomes, the cost outweighs. So you keep doing stuff like that, but you have to find other ways to be more nationally relevant. I think that continuing to go to the Olympics is important from a marketing perspective. We don't see it with the numbers, but I think as more players like a Matthews and like a McDavid, for those are the types of guys that we're going to see in the next couple of Olympics. And if we're without them, I think that's not good, because that's when you're going to get the highest level of viewership, even though we've got some terrible time differences to deal with over the next two Olympics.
Yep.
But yeah, so there are all those different things, and that supports the individual, it supports the league, it supports the teams. But again, the league is kind of in a position where they can't do a whole lot because of the way that they structured their most recent TV contract. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the whole cord cutting and everything else affects how people view sports. But the NHL has to find a way to be kind of on the forefront and making sure that the game is available to as many people as many times. And we're seeing that a little bit more this year with free games on Twitter and on their NHL app and things of that nature that just help make the game more available. That's all you can do, is just try to make it more available.
TJ Oshie is more well-known than most NHL players because of what he did at Sochi with his shootout performance against Russia. You mentioned, though, Pyeongchang, South Korea, next time out in 2018, and then Beijing. So two more Asian Winter Olympics, and more pointedly on the other side of the world, opposite side of the world of America. So there will be challenges, and it seems like there is a fight, or at least a bit of a dust-up between the NHL and the NHLPA and the IIHF to figure out
that's going to be
they are going to send him. It will be. One last thing for you, Chris. Speaking of international play, I know you're a passionate USA hockey fan and supporter, but that had to have been a disappointing World Cup for you from that perspective, judging by how the team was put together and also the performance. Couldn't have gone any worse. So where would you go with USA hockey with the next big best-on-best tournament, which we hope, most of us hope at least, will be 2018 Winter Olympics?
Yeah, well, I'd like to say that they learned their lesson from this, but there's been next to no movement on that front. I thought, one of the suggestions that I had in a piece that I wrote right after the World Cup was that they disassemble the national team advisory group, which is made up of NHL GMs, assistant GMs, other executives. They're going backwards, and it's the same people every time. And you either have to get fresh blood in there, or you have to shake up how the national teams are run in general. I think that there's one thing that Hockey Canada has been on the forefront of, and that's national team management and how they run their management in a very similar manner. But they have changed their philosophy on how they build teams. USA Hockey has gone backwards in that philosophy, and we saw at the World Cup, probably one of the most disastrous international tournaments. I mean, they're lucky that there were enough people that thought that this was a gimmick, that not many people watched the tournament, but people knew what happened. And I think that for the first time, there's actually been some pressure from, the media just absolutely destroyed USA Hockey, and rightfully so. And they need that pressure. They haven't had enough of that. And so, I mean, the negative coverage that got, if that doesn't move the needle, if that doesn't bring about change, then I don't know that we'll ever see change. But it is something that they have to consider, because that was a complete disaster, a complete embarrassment. And if nothing changes, it's just going to be more of the same. So the good news, though, I will say, is that the young guys are coming. They didn't have some of their best players, Goudreau, and I think guys like Saad, Eichel, Gostisbehere, all could have potentially made the roster. I don't know, based on the management group, they might not have, but those are the types of guys that they have coming up. And then, Matthews, I think, will be a leader, as will Eichel and Dylan Larkin and players like that. So that's the good news. But absolutely, that is one that should stick in the craw of USA Hockey for a very long time.
And of course, once your little one is ready to go and ready to play, that'll really lift USA Hockey to new heights.
Let's hope.
Chris, thank you very much. Chris Peters joining me for the third segment this week of Geiks Got Game. A pleasure to catch up with you, and we'll have to chat again soon. We'll look for you on Twitter, correct? Just Chris Peters, right?
Chris M. Peters,
Chris
yeah,
M.
on
Peters.
Twitter for now, and who knows when after that. So
if you're out there looking for a hockey writer, anyone who's listening, hire Chris Peters, because I love reading his stuff. For now, though, it'll be limited to 140 characters at a time, but hey, we take what we can get. That's Chris. I'm Matt. We'll return to wrap up the show in just a little bit. Just a hot second on the River's Edge.
You didn't wash your hands! People who do not wash their hands should be fined. And I'm sorry, I don't know about all of you, but if you're gonna castrate me, you might as well just kill me! So enjoy your hot dog, you jackass!
Get educated with Brian Crawford live Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m. here on the River's Edge.
Overtime begins on Geiks Got Game on the River's Edge. Again, thank you to Tom Benoit for engineering this week's show. Plenty of hockey talk. Hope you've enjoyed it. Back to hockey this week after a brief foray into politics, kind of, at least how major political moments, major life moments can coincide and can intermingle with major sports moments. So I appreciated Brian Crawford rolling with me in that opening segment last week. I just had to chat with him and get his thoughts. I know he had plenty on the presidential election. Time for the final number on Geiks Got Game, and this week's final number is 46, as in the number of years since the plane crash, the tragic plane crash, as if there's any other kind, that wiped out almost the entire Marshall University football team. And as I mentioned in the opening segment, I'm wearing my Thundering Herd Kelly green. November 14th was the fateful date, 1970, in which Southern Airways Flight 932 crashed just shy of Huntington Tri-State Airport, the Milton J. Ferguson Field in Cerrito, West Virginia, just outside Huntington. It killed all 75 people on board, and once again, the Thundering Herd football team present day, commemorating the lives lost and just the tragedy in general with throwback uniforms. And that's all well and good, but if you really want to appreciate what that crash meant to the community and what the rebound, more pointedly, meant to that community at the foot of the Appalachian Mountains, you need to go down to Huntington, West Virginia. About a 4-hour drive from here. Head on down through Morgantown, past that ugly school to the north, West Virginia University, on through Charleston on Interstate 79, and make a right turn onto Interstate 64. You'll be in Huntington before you know it. On November 14th every year, the fountain at the center of campus, which does commemorate the lives lost, is turned off on November 14th each year as a symbol for the lives that were snuffed out tragically there. At the edge of that airfield 46 years ago now. And I went to Marshall not really knowing much of the story. And I'm 31 years old, so I was still 15 years shy of being in existence when the crash happened. So it was really good for me to get that history lesson and to understand how much of, not just a national story it was, but the impact that it had, and really an unprecedented type of situation until we saw in Russia a few years back the Lokomotiv Yaroslavl professional hockey team in the Continental Hockey League, the KHL, suffered a similar accident when their plane crashed on their way to a game. So between then, that moment, which I believe was 2013, and 1970, there had not been a similar type of a situation where a plane crash wipes out an entire team. And in Huntington, as I mentioned, 75 lives were lost. And so I went to school, was heavily involved with the radio station, with the newspaper, with the TV station down there. So you get to know the story and the backstory. But what really made it come alive for me was when Hollywood came to Huntington for 6 weeks in the spring of 2006 to film the movie We Are Marshall. And 10 years later, I still feel blessed to have played a tiny part in commemorating the memory of the lives lost in the film. Matthew McConaughey playing the head coach, Jack Lengel, who left his job, a comfortable job at Worcester College in the state of Ohio, to try to lift this program up, to get it back on its feet. There was serious question as to whether Marshall would ever play football again after that plane went down. And while that may seem trivial, Jack Lengel and President Don Dedman believed that it was integral to the rebound, the emotional rebound of the community and the university to get the young Thundering Herd, as they were called in 1971, back on the field. Don Dedman, the president, as you might know if you watched the movie We Are Marshall, petitioned the NCAA to allow freshmen to play varsity. That was not allowed at the time. People may not know that, but Marshall got a special exemption after much cajoling from Don Dedman. So he's a big hero in this story, too, played by David Strathairn in the movie. And, of course, I mentioned McConaughey, but I mentioned I played a tiny part in the movie. I was a one-day extra, got paid $75. I would have paid them $75 or more to experience what I did up at the cemetery in Huntington, up on top of the hill where the bodies were buried, and where the memorial still stands today, commemorating the crash. But I took part in the scene in which McConaughey, as Coach Jack Lengel, delivers a pregame talk, delivers a speech at the grave site before the team played its first home game following the crash against Xavier. And they go on to win the game dramatically on the final play. You couldn't draw it up if you were in Hollywood. So it was quite the moment in sports history and, of course, in college football history. But I was honored to play a player at the cemetery. Got a nice leisure suit from the early 1970s. Picked out my fro at the time, so I fit in with the period. But to be there and listen in and pretend to envision myself in the role of the young Thundering Herd in 1971, I'm not sure there was a better way, a more impactful way to understand or to try to empathize with the situation as it was back in 1970-71. And Jack Lengel never got the program turned around in terms of wins and losses, but as he said in the movie, as McConaughey said in the movie memorably, I'm not sure if Lengel actually said this, but I love the way that it was put in the script. It's not whether you win or lose, it's if you play the game. And I've often thought about that in terms of my career, in terms of other things. It's a powerful message to participate, to be a participant in life, and to get involved. And I think that's maybe the primary lesson we can take from the Marshall University football team of the early 70s. Just get back on the field. You never know what might happen. You might have a crazy Hollywood ending like the Thundering Herd did, those 45 years ago against Xavier at what was Fairfield Stadium. Now the Herd has a much bigger home, Joan C. Edwards Stadium. My wife and I were able to make it down for homecoming last year. Not this year with the baby on the way, but just thinking back to last year and thinking back to all the times that the two of us were on campus. It's where we met, and you hear these stories, and they come to life. And as I mentioned, if you are a college football fan especially, I hope you can make it down to Marshall for the game after the ceremony. It's always very emotional and very impactful, and as I mentioned, the message of that team has sustained me for many years, 10 years in fact, after the movie and that scene that I took part in were shot. Thank you to Chris Peters for his participation on this week's show. Thank you for your participation. Without you, it wouldn't be possible here on the River's Edge. For Tom Benoit here in studio, I'm Matt Geico, reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. It's been great to be with you. I'll talk to you next week, right back here in Millvale.